It explored whether or not emphasizing or skewing the protein intake toward early day or late day was better in terms of muscle hypertrophy, and they also looked at some parameters of strength, like grip strength. Basically, the takeaway from this study was that mice and humans can utilize amino acids that are ingested early in the day better than they can utilize amino acids ingested later in the day, in particular toward muscle hypertrophy and growth, or maintenance of muscle, which for those of you that aren't interested in much muscle hypertrophy, that aren't trying to grow your muscles, that maintaining muscle, regardless of one's athletic prowess, regardless of one's age, is extremely important, because loss of skeletal muscle is one of the major causes of injury as we age. It's one of the major causes, believe it or not, of cognitive and metabolic deficits as we age. So maintaining muscle is important. Building muscle might be important to some of you, but what they found was ingesting protein early in the day and these amino acids early in the day led to more muscle hypertrophy than if the majority of amino acids and proteins were ingested late in the day. So this translates to intermittent fasting, such that if you are interested in muscle hypertrophy, you might, and I want to emphasize might, consider making sure that you're getting sufficient protein intake early in the day. This means that if you're somebody who wants to maintain or increase the amount of muscle mass that you have, ingesting a high protein meal early in the day ought to be beneficial for that. Does it mean that you should not eat protein in the afternoon and evening? No. I think a lot of people might have misinterpreted this study, and I don't want that to happen. This is only pointing out the fact that ingesting sufficient quality amino acids, including leucine, early in the day can be beneficial for maintenance and growth of muscle tissue. It does not say that you should avoid protein later in the day. Now, for you intermittent fasters, this could be relevant. I, for instance, was somebody who for a very long time skipped breakfast. My first meal of the day would be in the early afternoon, mostly protein and salad. In my case, animal protein, because that's in alignment with my values. Then in the evening, I would eat pasta, vegetables, etc. I might have some protein, some small piece of fish or chicken or something like that, but I didn't really emphasize that. On the basis of these results, I am experimenting with. I want to emphasize experimenting with. I haven't completely tossed out my old protocol, but I'm experimenting with eating proteins early in the day and eating lunch, and then dinner might be a light supper of some sort, but not so much protein later in the evening. Again, if you want to eat 6 meals a day, you want to eat round the clock, I'm not going to stop you. I'm not telling anybody what to do. As I mentioned earlier, nobody knows exactly how to eat for one's particular goals. But this study was really interesting because it really did show that we can utilize the proteins that are ingested early in the day better than we can utilize the proteins that are ingested later in the day. And of course, there will be factors that can shift that. For instance, if you work out very hard with resistance training later in the day, resistance training is known to increase protein synthesis. So it stands to reason that ingesting amino acids after that training would be beneficial. However, in this study, it did not seem to matter when the resistance training fell within the 24-hour schedule. The morning ingestion or early day ingestion of amino acids seemed to be beneficial. How early? Between the hours of about 5 a.m. and 10 a.m. for humans. Now, just a bit of mechanism to explain why this happens. So why would it be that ingesting protein early in the day would lead to more synthesis of muscle than ingesting protein later in the day? And the reason it turns out is related to the circadian clock mechanism that is present in all cells, including muscle cells. So muscles have fibers. I think most people are aware of that your muscles are not just one big blob of tissue. A lot of these little fibers that contract. Within those fibers, however, there are cells with nuclei. Those nuclei contain DNA. DNA is transcribed into RNA. RNA is translated into proteins. The DNA of your cells, including these muscle cells, are under strong circadian regulation. Each one has a pattern of gene expression that is different at different times during the 24-hour cycle. This is an unescapable reality of all cells in your body, right from your hair cells to your brain cells to your retinal cells to your toe on both feet. These cells make a gene called BMAL. BMAL, B-M-A-L, is a clock gene, And the expression of this clock gene varies across the 24-hour cycle. And proteins that are downstream of this BMAL gene influence protein synthesis. The circadian regulation of this BMAL gene turns out to be vitally important for this protein synthesis mechanism. How do we know that? Well, in this particular study, because they had a mouse that lacked BMAL, the gene was knocked out. They had a bunch of these mice. They were able to explore whether or not this early day feeding effect was present or absent in these mice that lacked the gene BMAL, and indeed it was absent. In other words, the effect of increased protein synthesis early in the day was eliminated in the absence of the BMAL gene. So what this means is that when you wake up in the morning, assuming you're following a standard schedule of being asleep at night and awake during the day, your muscle cells are primed to incorporate amino acids and synthesize muscle, regardless of whether or not you weight trained the night before at 8 p.m., or you don't weight train at all, or you weight train afterwards or before. I said 5 to 10 p.m. is the sort of critical window for this increased protein synthesis. All this means is that if you are interested in maintaining or enhancing muscle tissue volume, that you might want to consider eating quality protein and amino acids early in the day. You could train first, you could train after, you could not train at all. That's an entirely different discussion.